History says the people of Poveglia were erased by the plague, burned into the earth, and forgotten beneath layers of salt, ash, and silence. But in the summer of 2026, our team discovered something impossible. Voices were still broadcasting from the abandoned quarantine island, calling out in languages that have been dead for centuries. The recordings were not random interference. They were structured, rhythmic, almost like someone, or something, was trying to communicate through the static. The problem was that the island had no electricity, no functioning equipment, and no living person anywhere near it. Yet every night, at the same impossible frequency, the radio waves returned with the same message. And the closer we got to understanding it, the more it sounded like the voices were not coming from the past, but from somewhere trapped beneath the island itself. I was part of a small research team sent to document unusual electromagnetic activity around Poveglia, a place most people only knew through rumors. The island sits between Venice and the Lido, surrounded by shallow water and endless fog. But unlike the beautiful islands nearby, Poveglia had been left to decay. For centuries, it had carried a reputation as one of the most haunted places in Italy. During plague outbreaks, thousands of infected bodies were brought there and abandoned. Some were buried, some were burned, some were simply left in quarantine wards until there was nothing left of them but bones. Most people thought the stories were exaggerated. I did too, until I heard the radio. The journey there began under a sky that looked completely wrong. The summer heat of 2026 had turned the entire region into a furnace. The air above the water shimmered like glass, and the surface of the lagoon reflected the sun so brightly that it hurt to look at. Our boat cut through the water slowly, carrying equipment that weighed almost as much as the 4 people operating it. Dr. Elena Marconi led the expedition. She specialized in atmospheric electromagnetic anomalies and had spent years studying unusual radio phenomena. With her was Daniel, our engineer, who handled the receivers and scanning equipment. Sophia, a documentary filmmaker, recorded everything. And me. My job was simple. Collect audio samples, document environmental conditions, and help determine whether the signals were natural or artificial. The first strange thing happened before we even reached the island. Our receiver turned on by itself. Daniel immediately looked at the display. "That's impossible," he said. The device had been disconnected from its battery pack. He picked it up, checked the cables, and frowned. "What is it?" Elena asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He turned the screen toward us. A frequency was appearing, a narrow band signal, strong, stable, repeating. "What station is that?" Sophia asked. Daniel shook his head. "There shouldn't be a station. The island had been abandoned for decades. There were no active transmitters, no communication towers, no power grid. Nothing capable of producing a signal this clean." But the frequency continued, a low pulse, every 7 seconds. Like a heartbeat, we recorded it. At the time, we assumed it was some kind of atmospheric reflection or interference from distant sources. Strange things happen with radio waves, especially over water. Signals can travel farther than expected. Frequencies can bounce through layers of the atmosphere. There were explanations. There were always explanations. The boat reached the island just after noon. Poveglia looked worse than the photographs. The shoreline was covered in white salt deposits, making the rocks appear frozen. The old buildings stood in the distance like rotting teeth. Walls had collapsed, windows were empty, trees grew through cracked floors and broken ceilings. The silence was so complete that even our footsteps sounded unnatural. No birds, no insects, nothing. That was the first thing I noticed. An abandoned island should still have life, but Poveglia felt like life itself had decided to leave. As we moved toward the old quarantine buildings, Elena pointed out the remains of the hospital structures. This area was used to separate infected people from the mainland, she explained while Sophia filmed. Thousands were brought here during plague outbreaks. Many never left. Her voice became quieter. Some records say the island became a place where the dead and dying were simply removed from society. We entered the main ward through a doorway covered in vines. The smell hit us immediately. Wet stone, rotting wood, and something else, a faint metallic odor, like old blood. The walls were covered in cracks. Rusted beds remained where they had been abandoned. Dust covered everything, but there were strange marks on the floor. Not footprints, scratches. Long lines carved into the stone. Daniel crouched down. These weren't caused by weather. Elena looked at them. Could be from equipment being moved, but she didn't sound convinced. The marks continued deeper into the building. Toward the basement, we found the first transmitter tower near the back of the island. It was nothing more than a rusted structure rising above the trees. According to official records, it had not operated for decades. Daniel inspected it. There's no power source, he said. Can it still broadcast? I asked. No. He looked at the receiver. But something is. The signal was stronger here. The 7-second pulse had changed. Now there was something beneath it. A faint sound, almost like breathing. Sophia recorded the audio. When we played it back, we heard nothing but static. Just static. Until Elena slowed it down. Then the room became silent, because underneath the noise there was a pattern, a rhythm, a series of sounds that repeated again and again. Not words, not yet. Just something trying to become words. That evening, we set up camp inside the old administrative building. The heat outside was unbearable, but inside the walls, the temperature dropped suddenly. Our equipment continued recording. At 11:47 p.m., the signal returned, stronger than before. Daniel connected the wideband receiver and started analyzing the waveform. This isn't normal, he whispered. What do you mean? Elena asked. He pointed at the screen. The signal isn't moving through the air like a normal transmission. I looked at the monitor. The waveform looked wrong. It's skipping? Daniel shook his head. No. He swallowed. It's behaving like it's already inside the equipment. Nobody spoke. The static filled the room. Then the receiver produced a sound, a voice. Everyone froze. It was deep, distorted, almost human. It lasted 3 seconds, then disappeared. Daniel replayed it again and again. The sound was impossible to understand. But Elena noticed something. It's not random. She grabbed a notebook. Play it slower. The voice stretched into a horrible, broken sound. A sequence of syllables. Ancient. Foreign. Daniel ran it through every language database we had. Nothing. No match. Then he tried historical records. Still nothing. But after several minutes, the computer displayed a result. Not a language. A category. Extinct. The sounds resembled fragments from several dead languages, mixed together in a way no human speaker would naturally produce, like someone had learned them without ever hearing them spoken. The next morning, we explored beneath the main ward. The basement entrance was hidden behind a collapsed wall. Inside was a network of old rooms, storage areas, treatment rooms, and a chamber that wasn't on any map. The walls were different, older. The stones were darker. In the center of the room was a circular structure made from metal and rock. It looked like an ancient version of a radio receiver. But that made no sense. Radio technology did not exist when some of the materials appeared to have been placed there. Daniel approached it carefully. There's a magnetic field here. Elena stared at him. How strong? Not strong. He looked around. Just wrong. The receiver in my hand suddenly activated. The screen flashed. The signal had returned, but this time it wasn't coming from the tower. It was coming from beneath us. The audio started. At first, it was the same static. Then the voices appeared. Multiple voices. Hundreds, all speaking at once. Sophia dropped her camera. "What is that?" Nobody answered, because we all understood the same thing. The sounds were not a recording. They were responding. The voices changed when we moved. When Daniel stepped closer, the frequency shifted. When Elena spoke, the static changed. It was listening. The room suddenly filled with a low vibration. Dust fell from the ceiling. The circular structure in the center began to hum. And then we heard one clear phrase, not in an ancient language, not distorted, perfectly understandable. A human voice, a whisper. "Do not open the lower chamber." Nobody moved. The words came through the receiver, but the voice had not been transmitted from the tower. It had come from inside the room. Daniel backed away. "We need to leave." For the first time, Elena agreed immediately. We returned to the surface and prepared to evacuate. But the boat engine would not start. The battery was dead. The backup system was dead. Everything electrical had stopped, except the radio. The signal continued. Now it was louder. That night, the island changed. The silence disappeared. From inside the abandoned buildings, we heard movement. Slow footsteps, dragging sounds, doors opening and closing. But whenever we checked, there was nothing there. At 3:12 a.m., Sophia woke us. She was standing outside the room, holding her camera. Her face was pale. "I found something." The footage showed the hallway outside the basement. She had recorded it accidentally while walking. At first, nothing happened. Then a shadow appeared at the end of the corridor. A person standing completely still. Too tall, too thin. Sophia moved the camera closer. The figure did not move. Then the lights from the camera flickered, and the figure turned its head, not toward Sophia, toward the camera, like it knew it was being watched. The footage ended. There was no explanation, no reflection, no person, just a shape. The same night, Daniel discovered something hidden inside the radio signal. A repeating sequence, numbers, coordinates. He mapped them. They pointed to one location. The lower chamber, the place we were warned not to open. Elena refused, but Daniel argued that whatever was happening was connected to that room. "We came here to find the source." He looked at us. "We found it." Nobody wanted to admit it, but we all knew. The island was not haunted because of the dead. Something else had been there first. The next morning, we went back underground. The entrance to the lower chamber was no longer blocked. The collapsed stones had moved, not fallen, moved, as if someone had cleared them from the other side. The door beneath was covered in markings. Some resembled religious symbols. Others resembled writing. But the longer we stared, the less they looked like symbols. They looked like recordings, like someone had carved sound into stone. Daniel touched the surface. The receiver activated. The door vibrated, and the markings began producing a faint sound. The same voices, the same dead languages. But now we could hear something underneath. Panic. The voices were not speaking. They were screaming, a message buried under centuries of static. Elena began translating fragments. She recognized pieces from old plague records, prayers, warnings, names. Then she stopped. "What?" I asked. She looked terrified. "It's not describing the people who died here." Her hands shook. "It's describing what they found." The door opened, slowly. Inside was a chamber, far older than the island's known history. The walls were covered with the same carved patterns. In the center was a structure connected to the ground. Not built, grown, like stone and metal had fused together. The air inside was freezing. Then the radio spoke, a single voice, clear. Finally, we stepped back. The voice continued. "You remembered," the receiver crackled. Elena whispered. "Who are you?" The answer came after a long pause. "We are what remained." The chamber began vibrating. The sound grew louder. The voices returned. Thousands of them, all speaking, all crying, all trapped. Daniel suddenly pointed at the walls. The markings were changing. New lines were appearing, forming shapes, words, a message. But not for us, for something else. A signal, a call. The radio frequency began climbing, higher, beyond anything our equipment should detect. The island itself felt like it was waking up. Outside, the sky darkened. A storm appeared from nowhere. The ocean surrounding Poveglia began moving in impossible patterns, like waves were responding to the signal. Then the voice spoke again. This time, it used my name. I froze, because I had never told the radio who I was. "I know you," it whispered. The chamber walls trembled. "I know all who listen." Daniel grabbed my arm. "We leave. Now." We ran. The moment we exited the chamber, the entire basement shook. Behind us, something made a sound. Not a roar, not a scream. Something worse. The sound of something enormous trying to breathe after being asleep for centuries. The stairs cracked. The walls split. We reached the surface as the old buildings began collapsing. The boat finally started. We didn't question why. We just escaped. As we moved away from the island, we looked back. The transmitter tower was glowing, not with electricity, with a pale light coming from inside the metal. The radio on the boat turned on, all by itself. Static filled the cabin. Then a voice whispered, "Do not let them hear us. We recorded everything. We brought the evidence back." Experts examined the recordings. Some called it interference. Others refused to comment, but one thing bothered everyone: the languages. The sounds were confirmed to match fragments from multiple extinct languages. Languages separated by thousands of miles and centuries. Languages that should never have existed together. And then came the final discovery. A week after returning, I reviewed the last recording from Poveglia. I noticed something we had missed. The voices were not speaking at random. They were counting. Every 7 seconds, one pulse, one number, one step closer. I increased the volume. The static cleared. And beneath all those ancient voices, beneath all the warnings and screams, there was another sound. A voice, a modern voice. A voice recorded from our own expedition. Mine. Saying something I never said. A sentence captured before we entered the chamber. A sentence that appeared to come from the future. "Whatever you do, don't bring the signal back." I stopped the recording, because at that exact moment my radio turned on. The same frequency, the same pulse, the same impossible voice. But this time, it wasn't coming from Poveglia. It was coming from inside my house. And after a few seconds of static, it whispered the only words I still cannot explain. "We found a new island. The recording is still being studied. The official report says Poveglia remains abandoned. No power, no transmissions, no activity. But every night at 3:12 a.m., the same frequency appears. And if you listen closely enough, the static still speaks. Not to everyone, only to those who answer. The island was never sending a message from the dead. It was a message to something waiting. And whatever was buried beneath Poveglia was never trapped there. It was waiting for someone to open the door.